awesome guest today, all the way from New York, John Skomski, the host of Think.Live.Repeat. And this is honestly, I didn't know where this episode was going to go. John and I are so aligned in so many things, but what was really cool is he gave great advice on how to start your very own podcast and so many great antidotes and success stories. You're absolutely going to love it. Make sure you listen to the end and go to the show notes and go follow John on Instagram, on Facebook, and check out his podcast, Think, Live, Repeat. Enjoy the episode.
Together. Cool. All right, let's do this.
Okay, let's do it. All right, welcome back to another episode of Winning the Moment. I have a special guest today with me. John, John, say your last name for me one more time.
Skomski.
So a cool story with John and I had the pleasure of being on his podcast, Think, Live, Repeat. That was probably, what do you think, 60 days ago, maybe?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah, a couple months.
And John and I had never met, still have yet to meet. And we are just on Instagram in this space trying to create awareness for what we believe in and cross paths on some post about a book. And I think I saw you at a podcast and I was like, hey, if you ever need a guest, I'd love to be on. And then we got connected and I got to be on his podcast, as I said. And turns out we've got like mutual friends and it's crazy how connected we are for have never actually meeting each other.
It is a exceptionally small world. For as big as it is, 7-8 billion people, whatever we're pushing now, it's crazy how well connected we are and didn't even know it.
No, really, I saw you do that stuff with Ken Rusk, and I was like, what the heck? I was just a guest on his podcast like maybe a week or so before he was a guest on yours. And then I saw that and it was like with Nick and Book Thinkers. And it was like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. Speaking of Nick and Book Thinkers, I was just on the phone with him on my way over here, and is helping like Lewis Holmes put on his event in September. And when he's telling me about it, I was like, Nick, you got to do a Book Thinkers event. Like, let's bring all these people together because we're connecting in the metaverse, whatever you want to call it, on all these social channels. Like, I would love to get to meet and network with everyone. He was like, hey, that's not a bad idea. So he is in the process of putting together a Book Thinkers event in September. That'll be the day before Lewis's stuff.
Yeah, he is. And I'm actually involved in helping plan that. So
that's amazing. Of course you are.
Yes. Of course I am. Obviously. Yeah. So I'm working with Ken specifically on a couple of things and some other planning stuff. So I'll be there. You'll be there. It's going to be a great time. And I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, man.
I've never looked forward to Labor Day weekend so much before.
That's so exciting. I figured you would be involved. I can't wait to be able to meet everyone in person. It's going to be awesome.
It is.
So remind me, what part of the country are you living in?
So upstate New York, born and raised outside of Rochester. So, everyone thinks New York City. It's probably 6 to 7, depending on the traffic, 6 to 7 hours away. So nowhere near the city.
So is that like 20 miles out then? 20 miles out of the city?
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Maybe 30.
Okay, so John, let's talk a little bit about your backstory. Like, tell the audience who you are.
Yeah, so, it was interesting. I had a pretty specific upbringing, or maybe unique would be a better word. So raised in a super conservative home, Christian home, homeschooled, church all the time. What many would consider to be kind of cloistered, maybe would be a good word. So, kind of growing up, and that's all I knew. And so I ended up earning my bachelor degree through online college before online college was sexy. So, earned my bachelor's degree and then ended up getting hired on with a company based out of Texas to coach students earning their bachelor's degrees online. So I was part of the program as a student. I had a coach, and so accelerated distance learning was still, early on in development. So I worked there for a few years and really got a love and a taste for coaching, working with people, helping, breaking down goal setting. And it was funny because, really being engaged to work with students through their helping them get to the next test, the next course, that sort of thing. But invariably, you would talk about life goals and purpose and all these more existential sort of things. So did that for a few years, loved the aspect of working with people and helping them, not so much crazy about education, higher ed and all that. My degree was in business, so I pivoted and joined a financial planning firm going on 9 years. That was in 2014, and started up kind of through the ranks as an employee. A few years into it, launched my own practice as a partner at the firm where I still am to this day. And so, you know, kind of doing the same thing that I was doing then, except talking about education. Now I'm talking about money and retirement, and sustainable income, and all these things, but also doing that same kind of life coaching slash counseling slash therapy that that I was doing even, almost a decade ago now. And so that's kind of my background in terms of how I ultimately like got into personal development and podcast space and launching a personal brand and all that. Basically, it was a crisis for me. 2020 hit. Life was easy up until that point. Business was growing. I'd already crossed six figures of revenue at that point, pretty early out of the gate. So multiple six figures. It was like perfect. We had just changed broker dealers. That went well. Life was good, and we celebrated our. See, that would have been 6-year wedding anniversary at that point. Spent almost 2 weeks in Costa Rica. Come back from that, boom. Within a couple of weeks, my wife has a severe anaphylactic reaction to what we believe to be fish. Still don't know for sure. Hospitalized. It was bad. Could have been life-threatening.
Oh, wow.
And within a couple of days, it had kind of like resurfaced. And again, some confusion as to exactly what it was. But then the doctors ended up screwing up the medication, overdosed on or mixed some of the drugs that were trying to counteract the reaction, sent her into some paralysis, other stuff. It was traumatic. And so I'm looking at it at that time. We have 2 kids. I'm like, am I going to lose my wife? Like, how?
Yeah.
What's going on here? And at that point, COVID had hit. Nobody knew what the heck that was, but markets were cascading. And so I'm watching my business. This is granted, like I was not in the business in 08 and 09. So this was the first like real problem.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it was a doozy, markets dropped 30% in 30 days. So, that's going on. And then a week later of my wife being hospitalized, I think I'm having a heart attack. Like all of the classic signs. I'm shaking. I feel like I'm going to pass out. I'm sweating and flushed. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going out early. This is not how I envisioned this. And so I call the ambulance. I get a ride to the hospital a week to the night that my wife was in there, and, check out everything. Heart's fine. Everything's fine. And they're like, well, you've had a panic attack, and is anything stressful going on? I'm thinking, yeah, few things. And so that was and life ground to a halt, because at that point, everything that I had kind of known and got accustomed to was gone. Everything was challenging, from driving a car to simply just like living, dealing with panic attacks and just chronic anxiety. And it was a really dark kind of 6-7 months there. Got into therapy, counseling, worked through and highlighted the problems that kind of led up to that. Because obviously the trauma was the
catalyst.
Yeah, exactly. But it was just highlighting years of poor thinking, poor habits, and a lack of attention, a lack of investing in myself and how I thought and how I showed up. So from the kind of therapy and coaching, I pivoted more into this self-led journey of personal development, podcast consumption. I became a podcast junkie pretty quickly. And I was like, okay, I want to broaden my reach, my influence, and actually help people, not just with, panic and anxiety, but just general overall thinking, because how we think absolutely impacts how we live and how we show up, and ultimately the direction in life we go. So 2021 into 2022 was basically building, investing inward, thinking intentionally, living differently. And I launched a podcast in the summer of last year. And the idea, and it was funny, initially my idea is to create a body of work that says, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I'm well connected, and use that as a leverage to then start doing some keynote speaking. Well, that's still the goal, still doing that. However, I've fallen completely in love, and I'm obsessed with the art of podcasting as a host, as being a guest on shows. And so now it's like, it's kind of blossoming into connections that I never thought possible, doing some consulting work. I've got more than 52 episodes either recorded or lined up, which was crazy to think about at this point, because when I started, I was like, what if nobody talks to me? And
it's a lot of guests.
It is a lot of guests. Yeah. So that's the journey. So I'm running my practice, dad, husband, running the brand, running the pod, and really just trying to make a difference, help people think and live differently.
I love that. It's interesting how you talk about, I was going to ask how many episodes you had. Because like when you go and you look at a podcast and you see, oh, they've got 200 or they got 300, it's like until you start doing it, you don't realize the gravity of that. Because doing one episode, the prep, the relationship building, the time to actually physically do the episode, then the editing, the posting, like creating all of that stuff. And if you're going to really drive awareness, then you've got to obviously be active marketing it. And there's just so much that goes into it, like it's unbelievable when you see it like a Joe Rogan or those people who just have hundreds of episodes, just the determination and will it takes to start something and see it through for such a long period of time.
Huge. It's the consistency. I find that because it's everybody can do anything new and exciting for,
of course,
a few weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
But you get to like, and I don't know the stat, but within the first year, I think it's like 80 or 90% of podcasts die. And if you go on like massive online podcast directories, most of them are zombies. They haven't had a new episode in months, possibly years. And especially with COVID, everyone was home. Everyone was a podcaster, just like everyone was, fill in the blank. And then people got back to their normal lives and these things drop off. So it's kind of funny. It's not hard to be in the top, echelon. You just have to show up, do it consistently, and be somewhat informative or entertaining or relatable or something, and you'll gain traction. But I tell you, man, it's a grind. Some weeks you're just like, okay, gotta do the show notes, and the talking. This is the easy part.
Yeah, right.
It's fun,
of course.
But it takes dedication.
What's your like strategy, or how do you execute it? How do you go about getting to those 52 episodes? Are you doing like one a week or what? Yeah. How do you do it?
So we do weekly episodes every Tuesday morning. And so this week, as the time of recording here, end of May, it was episode 42. And so, and part of it was learning that people who are serving leaders, who are trying to make a difference in the lives of others, are extremely generous and willing to give of their time.
Yeah.
And I kind of was under the impression that, like, unless I'm talking to my friends, who's going to bother talking to me? Because I'm a nobody. Like, I have a business, but outside of that space, I'm a nobody.
Yeah,
right?
In this sphere, you're new.
Yeah. No, I'm new, brand new. And I told you this when you were on my show. I was not on social media before May of last year. I'm turning 32 this year. No Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter, nothing besides a very old LinkedIn from pre 2022.
Yeah.
And, no college buddies, no family. Like, I didn't have a nucleus to build off of. So it was, when I say organic growth, truly organic. But, it was a matter of, I was initially just so petrified of starting a show and then not being able to get people to show up, like guests. So I kind of like mad network connected, some local people. Nick at Book Thinkers was a tremendous resource because he's like wildly connected, made some strategic connections, gave guests a great experience. And then it's just started to multiply. Now I have guests who come to me and say, hey, you need to talk to so-and-so. And I've literally had to push guests out like 2 or 3 months now, because between my surplus of recorded episodes and then the ones I'm going to be recording, I don't want people waiting 3 or 4 months to hear their conversations. So it's not being afraid to ask, because at the end of the day, they don't know you anyways. So what are you worried about, right? Like,
the worst they can say is no.
They're going to say no. And if they think you're stupid and who are you for asking, then you probably didn't want them on the show anyways. Sure. And you'll probably never meet them again. And if you were to meet them again, you'll probably be as successful or more, because those are the only way you're going to meet those types of people. And what do you got to worry about? You can just be like, hey, remember me when you blew me off? Well, no, I'm successful. Like, it's really, you got to play this game in your mind of, it's really not that big of a deal, and be confident and ask. And I guess I got enough asks in where it worked out.
How did you get connected with Nick from Book Thinkers? What did that look like?
To this day, he and I have talked about it several times. I am not 100% sure, and I may never know. I think it was a post he made, and I don't, because he connected me with Ken, and kind of everything blossomed from there. But I think I originally came across one of his reels randomly and just reached out and was like, hey, man, love what you're doing. And he's like, cool, let's connect. And then boom, it happened from there. But I think it was one of his reels, but circa fall of 22 is my best estimate.
So it was when you say he introduced you to Ken, was Ken on your podcast like earlier before his book and then come on again, or?
No, so I kind of know I didn't know anyone from that whole circle. So anyone who's
Yeah.
worked with book thinkers or whatever. So it was literally like, I had kind of connected with Nick and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I like talking to authors and speakers and other people in this space. And he's like, well, I have a whole brand and a whole business centered on promoting people, part of which includes getting them on podcasts. So, hey, what do you think about having, and then Ken was the first one. Why don't you have Ken on? And then that went well. And Ken and I hit it off and we built this ongoing relationship now. And then and then Nick would say, what about this person? What about that person? And it kind of just was like one after the other. And so it became a real focus. And this is for anyone who's like starting a podcast to elevate the guest and give them an experience and make them, if you can stop, hit the stop button on record and they're walking away feeling good.
Yeah.
And, even if it's just a couple original questions outside the normal ones that everybody asks, just think of like one or two things that most other guests or hosts probably didn't ask them. Show them you did your research, be genuine, give them a platform. People are going to appreciate that and remember you.
That's amazing. It's unique too, because when we connected, we didn't even know we had the book thinkers connection, right? Because we connected outside of that circle.
Yeah,
and
it might have even been a
fact.
comment on one of their posts. Like, I think I liked your comment or you liked mine, and then we like connected.
Yeah.
And then I got you on the show. And then actually it was funny because Nick down the road a bit was like, yeah, have you met Cody? I'm like, yep, already recorded. Done that.
That's awesome. So you talked about a lot to unpack on your backstory there. You said you really jumped into podcasts. I'm curious, was there a favorite podcast that you had that like really motivated you and made you feel like, okay, I'm doing it?
So this one's easy. So it was John Acuff, All It Takes Is a Goal. And John Acuff,
I know that name. Is he the ESPN MMA guy?
No, so he's a New York Times bestselling author. He's had what's his number? 8 or 9 jobs. His claim to fame was like 8 or 9 jobs in 10 years or something like that. He basically just hopped around trying to find his thing.
Okay.
And eventually writing became his thing, not just writing, but speaking. So now he speaks to Fortune 500 companies. He's about to release a book this fall, his 5th or 6th. I should know this. But that was the first one. At a recommendation of a friend, he gave me like 10 shows. And I was like, all right, I'll try this one. And I was like hooked. I was going back and listening to all his old ones, right? Like bumping up his download numbers.
Yeah, right.
And, so fun story on this. So I can't release all the details yet, but stay tuned because episode 52, the first anniversary edition, could be a special guest. And that you'll all love to hear. And who is he? Well, I can't say for sure yet.
Find out in 10 weeks.
Yeah, right? So anyways, but he was kind of the gateway drug, him and his show. And then from there it blossomed. I mean, anyone from like Ed Milet, more on personal development, Derek Kinney's Good Money podcast. Derek Kinney was my first guest, and he was tremendously gracious and generous with his time and input into me. If you want to pivot more to like business / personal development, Alex Hormozy's The Game.
Oh,
is like
Alex is amazing. I had the pleasure.
Dynamite.
I got to see him. Really funny. We went to this conference in Vegas. I've talked about it a bunch, called Growth Video. And Spencer, our VP of sales, was like, I want to go to this. And I was like, I don't know, dude. And he's like, Gary V's talking. I was like, all right, we can go. I'm going too, though, for Gary, right? And I looked at the list and I was like, I don't know who any of these other people are. Alex was one of them. I just wasn't aware yet. And this dude comes out on stage. He's got like jeans that are cut into shorts, a wife beater, and like a flannel that's not buttoned, but the sleeves ripped off, it looks like, with his bare hands, and like long socks and Crocs.
Yep.
And I was like, who is this guy? And it was the next 60 minutes or 60 of the best minutes of my life. And the way that it was just so powerful how he was authentically him. Because you ask yourself, like, okay, if I'm going to be a keynote speaker, if I'm going to be on stage, what am I going to represent? What do I wear? Am I wearing a suit? Am I wearing a t-shirt? Like, am I wearing Jordans? Like, what is that image I want to portray? And there's a lot of intentional thought that goes into it. So this guy walks out and I'm like, did he not think about it? But really it's all a part of his brand. And then he's talking about 100 million offers and how he scales these businesses. And I was just absolutely blown away. Like no one has ever given me an appearance and then given me a message and had those two things like not align in my brain where it was like, I can't figure this out. And honestly, it was probably one of the best speakers I've ever seen. Truly incredible.
Yeah. He is insane. And I've talked to people who worked closely with him or work closely with him. And he's like, literally, I've been told like an anomaly. It's, one guy was saying like, he's like NSA level government, like top security clearance, smart, but brilliant with sales and marketing and looks like a lumberjack. Like he's like, I don't know anyone in the entire world like Alex.
Yeah, he's
and
101.
I believe it. Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. It's crazy. My wife gets annoyed when I listen to his stuff because I always like feel like such a loser and that I need to be doing more. You know, like after I'm like, oh, I'll never be Alex. She's like, he's an anomaly. And I'm close. Oh, okay, whatever. And then of course someone else tells me that. And I'll be like, I told my wife, hey, you know what? Maybe you are right. Maybe Alex is an anomaly. She's like, I told you that already. But yeah, now he's on my hit list. Alex, if you're listening, I'm coming for you. I want you on my show. One day you're going to be on Think.Live.Repeat. So there you go.
That's awesome. We'll do a post about that one. Mallory, make a note to make sure we edit that down so we can make a post of that.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to just go on a limb and assume that you're going to have John Acuff on your podcast on week 52. And if that assumption, you don't have to say if it's right or not, but if it is, how does that feel for you to start out on this journey that is like, you know, climbing Mount Everest? Like there you can, and really that's a bad analogy because you can actually get to the top of Mount Everest. You'll probably never feel like your podcast has arrived because as you continue to progress, you're going to want more and more. And so how does it feel to like know that this person who inspired you is potentially going to be a guest on your show? And then what's the recommendation you have to someone who's on episode 10 or episode 1 or just in like the thought process of, I want to do this? Like, what's the advice that you give them? And what's the feeling, the emotion that you have from that?
Yeah. Well, if I were to have John Acuff on the show, I would feel extreme. I don't know. It's a combination of satisfaction and this idea of accomplishment because I like the word accomplishment because it means you've done something, you've moved from A to B, and I think the key is realizing that A to B is not a one step thing and then you're done.
Yeah, right.
What comes after B?
Yeah, you're going to record episode 53.
Right? Exactly, and so kind of balancing that of, oh my gosh, like I've arrived in the reality that I am currently, but also knowing this is going to be nothing compared to 3 years from now and 5 years, like whatever that is. Like, so using that, stacking them, like Hormozy talks a lot about stacking. You want to stack these wins. And so for me, and a lot of times the first one's the hardest because you have to, well, you're starting from day one.
Yeah.
You don't have a podcast. You don't know how to do it. Like I had the benefit of, you know, in my business, I talk to people all day. So I had that going for me. I have to draw out information in order to give good advice.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm just kind of, you know, shooting from the hip and hoping it works. So I've learned to draw out advice. So I lean very heavily on that and kind of let that offset my lack of technical expertise, like podcast development, editing, marketing, all that. So to say early on, I want Acuff on my first anniversary, that was validation that it worked, that I can now lean even more into this because it was like validation. Now, how to get from 10, you know, episode 5 or 10 to 52, I had to chunk it, man. It was like, okay, quarter's too long. Month. Sometimes a month was too long. It just had to be the week. Okay. And again, for me, I love the conversations. It was the after stuff. Like I haven't monetized the podcast. I have some other purposes for it at this point. So I'm doing, like, candidly, I am doing the editing myself, like literally last night because holiday weekend and I love leaving things to the end, you know, family leaves and I'm up, you know, late at night editing, doing the post edit work, splicing together show notes so that I had it ready for midnight, you know, Tuesday to go out. And so break it down into digestible chunks and then look at it from the value of connections versus like ROI of monetary gain.
Sure. Like how much am my YouTube channel going to make? Really, the relations are so much more valuable.
I would be wager to say, even if you did try to monetize it, number one, you're not going to get any. If you're starting, let me reframe that. If you're starting from the position of relative anonymity, right? You're not like Steph Curry starting a podcast, right? You're like John, who had no social media footprint. If you're like me, nobody's going to sponsor your show. Don't even bother. Like, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to waste their time or money. All right. You're not going to make money, and that's okay, because money will come down the road. Look at it as the opportunity to connect. Look at it as the opportunity to get free coaching, because when you're on the line and your mic is hot and you're talking to these accomplished people for the next 30, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, you most likely would not want to or could not afford an hour.
Oh yeah. What does an hour of Ken Russ time cost?
Yeah. Yeah. Thousands, tens of,
I was going to say,
who knows?
minimum 10 grand.
Yeah,
you reach out to Ken's people and say,
minimum.
I want an hour. It's 10 grand for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to be better. That's why you got to pick a space you're passionate about. Otherwise, don't bother. If you're just like, well, I think this is popular right now, so I should do this, you're going to give up.
Got to have a real purpose.
Got to have a real purpose. And then look at it as not, I mean, in a good way, be selfish, elevate the guests, but then look at it as how can they help you where you're at right now? And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had that have catapulted me into the next one, because I heard something and they didn't even know it sometimes. It clicked, it resonated, and then I adjusted, and then I implemented that with my next guest, and that elevated that conversation, which then elevated their experience, which then made them introduce me to someone else. And I don't know how else to say it. Like, you just have to do it, and the more you do it, if you're passionate about it, you'll get inspired and it'll build momentum. And then, they're not going to be able to stop you. What's
interesting too is then like you find relationships like a Nick at Book Thinkers, who your guys' relationship is symbiotic. Like, he needs a place for his authors and people to have a platform, and you have a platform and you want those people. So it's like this awesome relationship where you're both benefiting and you're getting this growth and you're building like real friendships, real connection. Like even having you on the podcast today, even though we've never met, it's like I'm telling my wife, oh, my friend John, and she knew who I was talking about, even though we've never actually really met. And I think what's so unique about podcasts is in today's world, it's very seldom that you talk to someone for an hour and you're actually engaged in that conversation and nothing else. Like, outside of a podcast, when do I not have my phone on? Because it's socially acceptable if I'm sitting with my buddy and my phone beeps for me to look at it. Like, he's not going to be offended. I'm not even worried about offending him. Right. And so there's not very often that you sit down and commit 60 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever it is, to just having a real conversation. And humans thrive off of connection. So I've just found it to be even therapeutic in a sense, where it's just like, it feels good to connect with people.
Oh yeah. The conversations that I've had I would almost guarantee not happen, not in person, not for that length of time, for all the reasons you just mentioned. There's too many distractions. There's too many other things going on. I am in a room with a closed door. I mean, the door is closed, the lights are on. I've got soundproofing stuff like this. Unless you're having conversations with people in these sorts of environments, which might be a little weird, you're not having them. And you can focus. So it's a way to level up yourself, what you're doing, your connections. Like, I'm not preaching that everybody should have a podcast, because they shouldn't, right? There's a lot of people we probably wouldn't want to listen to their podcast, but they do other great work. It's like, find your niche.
Yeah.
But if you're inclined to, for a couple $100, $200, $300, $400, you could get a good setup and some software, and you're off to the races. Give it a try. Give yourself 90 days.
Well, and even for me, it's like, I knew, because I wanted to do it. It was one of my goals for the year. I'm not a very technical person. I didn't have social media, just like you, until the book came out. And so I work with my team here called Blue Form Media, and I let them take care of all the stuff that I don't know how to do. Right. And so for me, I get to just come sit down at the studio, connect with you, and then they're able to handle all of that other stuff, which is huge for me, because I don't know how I could have worked it in otherwise. But it's really interesting. And I was talking about this in the last episode, but when it finally came time to like put it out there, I waited forever. And it was this fear that I had, and I don't know why. I don't like it. It's irrational to be afraid of something that can't actually hurt me. But yet here I had all this tranche of all these episodes and I hadn't put one out yet. And it's like, what am I doing? And finally last week I was like, I'm doing it. I don't know how to do it, but I'm gonna figure it out. And so I finally got through the process and now it's on all the things, and I've got my YouTube, and I got on Fiverr, and I had people help me with an introduction and how to have like an intro for the YouTube. And it was really like liberating in a sense where I felt, so to your point, accomplished, that there was this thing I had no idea how to do and I figured it out, and that just felt so rewarding.
Oh, it's huge. Like I did this the other day. I just went on Apple Podcasts and I just scrolled right from the trailer all the way to current episode. And I just looked at it and I thought back, and I don't know, maybe took 10 minutes and just thought of the various conversations with you, conversations with Derek Kinney, like I just Grant Baldwin. I just go through the list, and it's there. Like it's out there in the ethos. Like unless I delete it all, nobody can take that from me.
Yeah.
And it's proof of it's very tangible. Like this is a medium that feels intangible, but for all the intangibility of it, it is super. Like you go dig a ditch or build something, and you have that kind of, like Ken Russ calls it, that stand back feeling where you kind of look back and like, wow, I did that.
Right.
Well, there is a certain aspect to it, and it's very validating, and then it just kind of builds on itself, and you're, just continually leveling up from there.
Yeah, I had my dad on the podcast, and we're in the pool this weekend for the holiday, and I was talking about, we're joking about, he spent like 10 years in college because he was having too much fun, like gambling and having a good time. And so my daughter said something, and he was like, I'll tell you that story when you're older. And I was like, well, that story is cemented in time forever because it's on the podcast. So it's like, you don't even have to tell her. Like whenever she wants, she can go listen to it. And there's something really cool about that. This might be a hard question to answer, but of all the people you've had on your podcast, is there one episode that sticks out, or one guest that was like, wow, this was amazing? Like if you're telling a first time listener, go to episode what episode is it, and who is it, and why does that one stick out?
That's a tough. Wow, that is. I gotta say, that is a very difficult conversation.
Because I'm sure you love all of them, right?
I'm talking to you, so obviously yours was the best episode. So two come to mind. Can I do two?
Of course.
So one is my very first episode was with Derek Kinney. So you have to understand. So for me, the commonality that he and I shared is he was a financial planner for 20 years. Sold his practice in 2020 for multiple seven figures. Like had best in state awards. He was incredible. And then he launches his personal brand, Good Money, starts a podcast, hits Wall Street Journal bestseller, and he's off to the races. So this guy is like, up here.
Yeah.
And I reached out to him in May of last year.
So you didn't know him?
No, I know, not at all. I had no contact with him whatsoever.
Wow.
I think I used his contact me on the webpage. And it was like 2 weeks later, and his assistant, oh, that's right. I had just said, hey, I really admire what you do. You and I have a really similar background, and I kind of want to be you one day. Like, any tips? Could we like take 15 minutes? I didn't even ask him to be a guest, like in the forum.
Sure.
And I heard nothing, figured, oh, well, I tried. And then his assistant out of nowhere is like 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later is like, hey, Derek can talk for like 15 minutes on whatever day. So I talked to him. I remember sitting in the car talking to him. And he's like, yeah, I would love to get on your show, and let me send you a copy of the book, and just incredibly generous. And so I remember like distinctly the night before recording, because I hadn't recorded anything yet. I'm like, I got my wife on her phone on the app, like upstairs, and I'm down here trying to figure it out. And it didn't look this good.
Of course.
I've got a much better camera now and all this stuff, and like practicing, and I'm like writing, questions down, and he gave me like 45 minutes, and I got to fly down and see him back in September, and he did some he helped me and I helped him. It was kind of a symbiotic thing with some consulting work, that a program he was launching. And to this, I will always remember that experience. Like someone who was like so far beyond me.
Yeah.
So incredibly generous and took time. And
for your first guest, even more so. Because then it's like, you don't have anything to show.
No, like I like roll into the podosphere with a Wall Street Journal bestselling author as my first guest. And his name then connected me with Bob Berg, with Grant Baldwin, with several others from there. So he's been paying in spades. And then the other one that I think I just enjoyed the heck out of the conversation was Rodney Norman, comedian. He's kind of blown up on TikTok and Instagram. He's kind of this random sort of, he melds life coaching and motivation with comedy. I've never seen anyone do it quite like him. And he was another one of those ones that this guy's got like, 500,000 followers. He's not, And, I get a DM back. Sure, I'll join it. So I'm telling my wife, that crazy guy looks like Einstein, talks like a drunk hippie? Yeah, him. He's coming because that's his shtick. Like he
Yeah.
comes out, hey, how you doing? He's on the show, and we talk for like an hour, and he's like telling stories about, and it was just one of those moments where I don't know if I like learned anything like specific, like, like, oh, it wasn't a tactical, like 5 steps to success. It was just listening to someone who was maybe 15, 20, 30 years into like his craft, and just like, this is surreal. Like, pinch me. Is this real? So those two come to mind as probably my top, but honestly, it's very difficult to choose.
Well, even for me right now, like that's such an inspiration. And I think to anyone listening, because as I made my list of like, okay, who do I want to have on be my guest? And you're the first one that's virtual because I wanted to be able to have some human interaction. I've just enjoyed like when I was a guest and I got to sit across the person so much more. But obviously you have so much more reach and scale when you're able to do it like we're doing now. And I felt like, okay, let me get 20, 30 of these things under my belt with like my buddies and my close network of people before I attempt to like reach out to the stars, and like really take a swing. And so that's an amazing takeaway for me because you're so right. You said it earlier. It just didn't click in the same way of like, what's the worst they can do is say no. But to hear that you reached out like to someone who was an inspiration to you prior to even having a episode, and then of course what that did for you, it's like, man, I just need to get on and do it and anyone who's listening, because those people with those audiences we talked about, we didn't have social media prior to operating in this space. And so we don't have the reach that they do. You get someone on who's got 500,000 followers. And even if you get 10% of their audience who checks you out, that's a huge opportunity. So that's a real inspiration for me. Like I'm absolutely going to take that advice and start putting it to work. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, maybe I'm just insane. I don't know. I just do these things. My wife will attest to it. Once I have this idea, like whether it's a guest that I have to have on, like, sometimes it takes me a while to latch on to something, but once I'm on, it's like, good luck. Like I will hound you. Like I won't stalk you, but I might come close to like, you're going to come on my show one day, like whatever I got to do to make it happen.
I love that.
And I'm so jealous about the setup. And that's like 2.0 or 3.0 as I take this, as it grows. This is my basement right now. Like you can't tell, like, but over there's cinder blocks and there's electric panel, whatever. But that's the image you put forward.
Yeah.
Right? But to have it in person, like obviously Milet has made his multiple tens of hundreds of millions or whatever, but to be able to like fly people out, like whoever, get them in studio,
right.
Like, interact for 2 hours, that's wild. And I think that's where some of the best interviews happen, is where you're sitting across the table and there's just this magic moment. You capture it on film. Not that you can't do it virtually, but there's just something about being face to face.
I know. So you interviewed Ken in person. Have you done any other ones besides Ken that you've been able to do in person?
So that was kind of funny. So Ken it was kind of in conjunction with Book Thinker. So we were doing content for his channel. Yeah. So it wasn't actually for my podcast.
Gotcha.
So
you were just asking the questions.
So I went out to one of his filming sessions with Nick and the team and basically spent the day and I kind of got the mic for 20 to 30 minutes. And as they recorded, just asked a bunch of questions, shot the breeze. It was fun. But no, nothing for the podcast per se, nothing in person yet. This will be season 1. We'll wrap up in August, probably take 2 or 3 weeks to just retool, figure things, recalibrate. I'm thinking season 2 will be, year 2 by season 3, because I'm thinking that in chunks of years, at least right now, to have some kind of in-person option will probably be where I go. I don't know. We'll see. But eventually want to get to that point.
Yeah, I love that. So next question for you. And I know you've read the book, Winning the Moment, and so I probably don't need to elaborate, but I will for first-time listeners. The question I want to ask you is, what's your biggest win? And I think you'll understand by reading the book that I want you to define a win in whatever capacity you define it. But up to this point in your life, what would you say is the biggest win that you've experienced?
I think, and it's going to sound cheesy, like, heartthrob moment, whatever, but I mean this like completely from the heart. And actually my wife and I were just talking about this weekend, because we got a rare occasion to ditch the 3 kids with my parents and then go on a date. So, we will have been married 9 years this year. And,
nice.
and like, us connecting, like how we connected and what we went through and early on in marriage and all that, with just working through life and things that, we got married super young. So growing up on all that.
Yes. Were
Um,
you 23 when you got married?
yeah. Yeah. So, or no, what is that? Yeah, I was 23. Yeah, I was 23. So yeah, cause I got married at 2014. So, the fact I feel like I hit the jackpot. I don't know how else to say it. Like, she has been an inspiration to me through our entire relationship, like especially through 2020. Like, and like I had no like, I understand now having read about it and having looked back, but the spouse of the person going through like chronic anxiety and panic
Yeah.
and all that is as traumatic, or in some cases worse, because you're powerless. You
Yeah. They
can't
don't, they
not.
can't, they can't
No,
do it for you. They just have to
no,
watch you
no,
and
no, no.
support you in
You
whatever way
have
they
to
can.
go through it and watch that. And it's like, I can't, she can't tell me it's okay. Don't worry about it. Like, that doesn't fix it in that second. So, she, that has been the biggest win, that I've got somebody that, I hope we get another, 100,000 miles on the transmission here, and, uh grow old together, because there's no one person who has supported me more through building my business, going from salary to full commission and revenue that way, launching this podcast, all these various things. She's just like, they're like, okay, you got this, you can do it. And so I feel super blessed about that.
Well, yeah, when you get married young, you have the opportunity to grow together, right? Because
Yes.
you're experiencing so many firsts together. The first time you lose a salary, the first time you're commission only, the first time you buy your house. Like, there's so many firsts, and I think that behind any successful person, there's always a great partnership, right? And so
Oh
I
yeah.
think that I feel the same way about my wife. I think that's really awesome. You're the first person to say the biggest win is your wife, so you can tell her that and
Yeah.
get some
Hey,
brownie
we need
points
to clip
there.
this. I need to
Yeah.
post this, and I will tag her, because I'll get some major street cred for that. Yeah.
Okay, note to Mallory, cut that right there, and we'll let John use that. Okay, so then you always need duality in life, and so the follow up question to that is, what is your biggest loss?
Hmm. Well, so it's interesting, because when I look at it, I joke that, in 2020, in March, when everything was kind of hitting the fan, I thought I was going to lose my mind, thought I was going to lose my business, thought I was going to lose my health, and thought I was going to lose my mind. Like, literally,
Yeah,
that was this
everything was falling apart.
yeah, it was all hitting apart. So in a way, I kind of I don't say I lost my mind, but I lost my broken thinking, or at least my attachment to it. Very emotional based, short term, an inability to work through um, obstacles. And so I had to kind of lose it, as it were. Like, I didn't go
Yeah,
crazy, but like, I was
had a break.
I struggled to function as a
Yeah,
normal human for a while. And at that time going through it, I was like, what is the point of all this? What, like, I'm like, because at that point, thankfully, we're all working remote. So I'd like have client calls. And I remember vividly a couple times, like, my heart rate, and this is like, I'm in a room having a conversation on the phone by myself, and suddenly my heart rate just spikes up. Well, when you're like raw with panic, like off of recent panic attacks, that can immediately trigger. Like, it doesn't take much,
sure.
because there's been
Because then
very
you're
low
like, oh my God, it's
distance. Yeah.
happening, and then your
Yeah, it's
body amps
happening.
up.
And so I'm like, I literally remember hanging up and just like having to calm myself down, call the client, made up some excuse, the dog was barking, whatever. And so there was a period of time where I literally thought I lost who I was, how I thought, who I had been, all of that. And I don't feel that way anymore. I've built back and am better for having gone through that. Certainly more empathetic, but during that time, that was by far the biggest loss. And it's kind of ironic, but the biggest loss that I've experienced has also turned out to be the biggest gain in some ways, or the biggest teacher, maybe would be a more accurate way to put it.
Well, I think that's why I love that question. And to your point, sometimes you have to be lost to be found, right? And so I think that why I love to ask that question is almost always they can't even think of a loss. And then we have to like really like go back in time, like, well, I guess this happened and that was terrible. The thing that usually takes place is when you look back with introspection, it's no longer a negative. Like, because of those struggles, it allowed you to create the John we know today. And of course, you'd rather be the John you are today than the John you were a year ago. And so it's really hard to equate that as a loss. And I think the takeaway that I want for the audience is that when you're in the struggle, when you're in your anxiety and your panic attacks, it's so hard to believe that like good things are going to come because you're just mired in all that you are dealing with, and you really can't. I think you said it. You can't see forward. You can only see what you're in. And so for anyone who's listening and is struggling with anything, right? Because it doesn't have to be anxiety. It can be your relationship with your spouse, or it can be something going on with your family, or a loss of a job, or fear of uncertainty. It doesn't matter what you're going through. You are going to come out on the other side. And oftentimes the biggest adversities and the biggest obstacles we face always end up being our biggest successes, to exactly the point that you said. And so I really appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable, because I think it's important too, as people are listening to my podcast or yours, and they see these accomplished people, to know that like, just because you're an accomplished person doesn't mean that you had struggles. In fact, oftentimes the most accomplished people had some of the largest struggles, and that's what made them who they are. And I'm curious to talk about that just a little bit more. Was there one particular thing that really helped you pull out of it, or was it a compilation of a bunch of different things?
You know, yes and no. So the one thing is kind of ironic. So the initial therapist that I started working with, it didn't last long. And this is just an aside. This is actually still technically recording, still May. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And it is so important that people do get out and talk about it and be vulnerable. And I've tried to set an example of it with some of the recent content I put out. A great conversation with Ryan Dusick, founding drummer Maroon 5, and he can speak to that really well in a huge way. But going back to that, therapy was huge. Don't give up if it doesn't work right away, because the first guy I started working with, like, it became quickly apparent that he had just as much, if not more, anxiety than I did, or he was several years older than me, so maybe it's just more deeply set. But
sure,
like, he would make me nervous just watching him, like, nervously. He's like fiddling, and there was no judgment on him. Like, I'm just, you know, he was sharing stories about how he was super anxious about going through wide open spaces, and when he was driving, he couldn't look, and I'm just thinking, dude, like, this is not helping right now. So, you know, we worked through that, and I kind of pivoted into more of a coaching relationship. That was just something I was familiar with. So that was good, but I had to go through the process. And then I can't think of the guy's name off the top of my head. I'll probably think of it. It's David somebody or other, but he did basically exposure therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Just look that up. You'll see it. Dr. David Byrne, I think it is, maybe. And essentially, rather than going at it, again, personal, just the way I did it, can only speak from my experience, rather than going from a medication and a prescription approach, doing it from a mental workout and exposure therapy to the stressors, and working through it through a mindset-based stuff, rather than immediately reverting to drugs. Ironically, I had anxiety about the drugs. Like, I didn't want, they were trying to prescribe them. Like, I don't want to, no. You know, so, okay, so let's cognitive behavioral therapy. And so that's the kind of the route I went. So it was these daily things of, okay, this is freaking me out, this stressing me out. I need to expose myself to it in a safe way and realize that I'm okay. And then just kind of stacking those small daily exposures. And now I think of things, like running was attached to, in fact, some of the episodes I had were, I think, dehydration that created this physical sensation that then launched me into panic. So I struggled for years to get back into running, because, you know, you start feeling crappy. We're in our 30s. We're not in our best shape ever.
Yep.
And although you're going to be running a marathon before long, so you will be. But it start like setting me, and you start watching for those triggers. This is, if I obsess over this for like 30 seconds, I will then take to the next level, which will then push me. And so getting really good at spotting what the triggers were and not obsessing and allowing, and then trying to pivot, replace, and do these various things. So that was probably a long-winded answer, but there was no one moment. It was just a bunch of daily things, but there were various moments where it was like, aha. And then I would spend a few months working on that, and then the next aha, and then kind of like that.
Yeah, I love that. You actually said something that is so critically important, and it was that the general premise is, if it doesn't work in the beginning, don't give up. And that's ultimately what winning the moment's all about, because everything in life is that way. Like, if you start running today and you're like, oh, I ran a mile and I'm tired. I'm not a runner. It's like, well, yeah, you have to run like a bunch and then you got to push through. And, or if you start a podcast and you have 2 episodes, you're like, I don't have any listeners. It's like, well, yeah, you're not going to have any listeners. You got to keep going. And so that's really just such a great antidote for life, is that don't give up if at first you don't succeed, because the success is down the road. And it's the people who show up every day, regardless of the results, and keep working towards it, that ultimately get to the place that they want to go. So I think that was incredible. Now, next question I have for you is, be it your podcast or with your financial practice, did you have a mentor in your life that helped you get to the place that you are? Like what were the keys to your individual growth in that way?
Yeah. So I was blessed at various points to have individuals who have elevated me to the next level, like helped get me there. And one of them was actually a guy I met while I was coaching right out of college in that organization. Name's Jonathan Brush. Great guy. To this day, super close friend. And it's funny, he helped get me that job at that time, it was called College Plus. It's now been bought and sold several times. Helped me get the position there. Which ultimately helped me get the position that I have now as a business owner, because I started as an employee and they were impressed with the fact that I was there, right? And he'll resurface like every 3 to 4 years. He was the one who introduced me to Acuff's podcast, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Like I hadn't talked to him in years.
How cool is that?
And I reached out to him, was like, dude, I'm really this is a really bad time in my life. Like, oh, can we talk? And spent like 3 hours on the phone with me. So he has strategically just continued to help me. And then more recently, Derek Kinney has, like, he and I have talked ongoing at various points, and he's helped me more or less with this whole aspect. Because it's kind of funny, like he's 20 plus years my senior in the business, but he also hadn't done a ton of social media stuff. He also started a podcast like a year or two previous to me. So it wasn't like he's like an OG. So
you're in a similar trajectory in that space.
Yeah. He's just like similar context, but just that much more accomplished, but also kind of experiencing some of the same things, not too previous to me. So it was very relatable and it hit right. And it was like, okay, good. He's got these wins. I can have them. He's had these struggles. It's okay that I'm experiencing them. So yeah, those two definitely come to mind.
Okay, so then 2 more questions. The first one is, I know you've read the book, Winning the Moment. Was there any aha moment or a favorite takeaway from the book for you?
I loved it's funny, the whole rubber band idea or the bracelet idea, and those incremental good decisions, but something that to this day, in fact, I literally thought about it last night because I was up late editing the podcast, feel bad for me, was the idea that you make worse and worse decisions. Like you only have so many good decisions, like
willpower runs out.
And it runs out. And I wanted to eat some crappy food because I was tired and kind of like bored, hungry, or whatever. And I didn't. So it was a win, but I could have easily. And I can't tell you how many times I've thought of that, like late night, like, I want ice cream, or, let's just, like binge the TV show instead of like prepping for the next day. Cause I know I got to get up early and then I'll be, hurting. So that has been something that stuck with me and has literally impacted how I've made decisions and how I've set myself up for success. Like, okay, let's not wait till 10 because I might not have the fortitude to make the right call at that point.
Absolutely. I love that. That's incredible. So then the final question of the podcast, and this to me is the most important one, but how do you define success?
I want to be a husband that is close and is always able to communicate with my wife. I want to be a father that my kids like and respect. I want to have a relationship with them that will go on. Mine are very young right now, that will continue on. I want to set the table for that later on. And I want to be able to impact and influence people to level up how they think and ultimately accomplish what they want to. So whether it's financial, whether it's business related or personal, I want to create that catalyst to help them level up in their thinking, be that inspiration to do that.
It's really cool to have all these conversations with people and realize that so many people genuinely want to help other people. Because what you're saying outside of your family, family came first, right? So I love that it started with your wife and then it went to your kids, because you got to be a great husband, I think, first before you can be a great father, because that's where the relationship started. So I love that you did it in that order. But then you talk about you want to help other people and basically raise the tides for everyone, and there's no ulterior motive in that. It's not like there's a financial gain to that. It's just genuinely what you want to do. And I think with all of the media and all the things that get said, it's so easy to get lost. I'm like, man, what happened? What happened to us? What happened to America? What's going on? But it's really not like that. That's the narrative. It's not the reality. And there's so many people like yourself who genuinely want to help other people. And I think it's amazing. And I love the platform that you have for it. And I think that's a great catalyst to say, if people listening to this episode really love it, where do you want them to find you? What's the best way for them to connect with John?
So I'm most active on Instagram and Facebook as far as my content based on investing inward and based on the Think.Live.Repeat podcast. So you can find clips of the show there. You can find some freestyle reels and stuff I shoot. As far as the show itself goes, it's everywhere. Spotify, Amazon, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. Just type in Think.Live.Repeat. You'll find episodes there. Leave a review, trying to, get recognized in all the directories or that. Shoot me a DM if you got questions. If you're an author, speaker, you want to be a guest, reach out to me. You're thinking of starting a pod and you're like, hey, can I just pick your brain for 30 minutes and ask you things? Happy to help. Yeah.
I love that. And do you, are you on YouTube also? Do you put them on YouTube?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. That is a 23 to /24 goal. Okay. So especially now that YouTube is that podcast feature now that they unrolled recently.
Yeah.
It was, for me, it was just like, I got to pick one medium or two mediums. And it was Instagram and Facebook, but it will be also moving on to YouTube here before too long.
Okay. Well, I love it. Thank you so much for being here, John. It was a pleasure. An hour just flies by, but thank you so much for being willing to be a guest and then being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Cody. This is incredible. And, let's just bounce off each other's podcasts over the next several years. We'll do follow-ups of where we are. And
I love that.
Your next book and all that stuff.
We'll get you out here in person.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John.